what you're thinking. I was thinking the same thing when I went through this.
That I traded my fate for Spock's?
Yes. This isn't going to help, but it gets worse. This war with the Romulans, millions die. So far, it's still going on. Not only did you start something that should never have been started, the best chance at a lasting peace between the Federation and the Romulans in any timeline, well, turns out he's lying in a biobed.
Welcome to the General Order 1 podcast, where we are discussing the Star Trek Strange New Worlds television show. I'm joined by my longtime friends, Ben.
Hello.
And Jason.
I'm back.
That's right, you are back from shore leave, and
holidays were rough.
Yeah, well, yes, the last couple were done in December around Christmas and family. It definitely made it tough. And I think a couple of us got sick, but we are all back together now. And we are discussing Season 1, Episode 10.
I think it's pretty sad that you guys couldn't make time for your Star Trek podcast during the holidays.
I made it, but I Jason, you need to get your priorities straight.
Seriously.
I'm about to file divorce papers.
And just podcast full time?
Yeah, I'm getting there. I'm almost there, so.
I think by having a Star Trek podcast, that's going to just get taken care of for you. Like, the universe is going to work that one out. You're not going to have to do anything.
Did you have to put a reason on the divorce paperwork, and like the reason could be need more time to podcast?
I'm pretty sure if you put down spouse is doing a Star Trek podcast, they just fast track it. Like they don't even have a hearing. The judge just stamps it and that's it.
There you go. All right. Today we are discussing the season 1 finale, and it is entitled Equality of Mercy. Before we start, speaking of divorce, Ben, how is your wife doing? Has she divorced you? Because I was texting her sultry pictures of Pike all day, and she was all over it.
Yeah, that's not a good comparison for me. I'd appreciate if you could just not remind her that Anson Mount exists in the world. I'd appreciate that.
Man, I was watching this episode, and yeah, he's got a commanding presence and some good, like, full-on face shots, and I was screenshotting him and sending them to Ben's wife, because I know she's into Captain Pike. She has good taste. About Pike, maybe not Ben, but...
Yeah. and like, she's not even into Captain... I think she's just into Captain Pike because she thinks it's funny, not because...
I don't even know how it started. Like, I can count the number of times she sent me a text on one hand, and she sent me a message one day about you talking about Pike and how great looking he was, and I just agreed with her. I don't remember.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right, let's get started. I feel like this one might go long because there's a lot in this episode.
Yeah, we're going to have a lot to talk about.
Okay, so the episode opens with Pike doing a voiceover, and he mentions that they are on the edge of the neutral zone, and that the Enterprise and the USS Cayuga are giving supplies to the various outposts and doing some retrofitting. So they are on the edge of Federation space, so they are far away from the rest of the fleet. So just to set the stage that will definitely come up later.
Yeah, I mean, they make mention later in the episode that it takes several months to get out here from Earth. So they are way, way out. So
we see Pike in his quarters, and he is cooking dinner, I assume, for Captain Battelle, which, if you remember from the very first episode, or the pilot, she's essentially the one that tries to talk him into coming back to Starfleet. So we haven't seen her since, but she is back, and today she is on the Enterprise.
And they seem to be captains with benefits.
Yes, for sure. I mean, they were in the pilot too, right? I mean, she comes out of his bed. I mean, there's no explanation of who this lady is. Anyway, they're clearly good friends. So there is some discussion here. They are talking about the neutral zone, and it's worth mentioning here that I believe Pike says that the neutral zone is a remnant of the Federation and Romulan War from 100 years ago. So, I mean, just like modern countries have their own borders, and I guess international waters are sort of the neutral zone of, Earth, there are certain sections of space that are designed or designated to various races, and then there's the neutral zone, which is sort of no man's land.
Yeah, it's like the DMZ between North and South Korea.
Oh, there you go. That's a good description. So there's an interesting line here. They're discussing the Romulans and they're discussing the neutral zone. They're basically setting the stage for, what's going to happen. They're telling the audience. They're giving the audience a little backstory. And Pike says, the Romulans are the boogeymen. No one's ever seen one, which doesn't make any sense because he just got done saying that the neutral zone is a remnant of this war from 100 years ago. Like, I know 100 years is a long time, but don't you have history books?
No, the idea is that back during this war, they knew the Romulans they fought them, but they never saw one. They were just doing ship to ship combat. They never captured anybody. They never communicated over the view screen, so they don't know that the Romulans are Vulcans, basically.
Huh. Well,
it was a big reveal. So we talked about this earlier in our journey through the season. I can't remember which episode it was, but there was one, whatever episode was that they had that was the sub episode where they were fighting. Was it that when they were fighting the Gorn or something? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Memento Mori.
Yeah, it was Memento Mori. I said it reminded me a lot of an original series episode called Balance of Terror. And we're going to have a lot to talk about with that one because that's basically what this episode is. So they really leaned into it for this one.
Well, it's interesting that Pike says the Romulans are boogeymen, which is almost word for word what was it he or what one of them said about the Gorn, right? So this is the second big scary enemy that nobody's seen, right? I don't know why they went with that. They could have just said, "Oh, it's the Romulans, and they're back. We haven't seen them in 100 years," but I don't know.
Well, in the original series, that episode, they made a big deal about how the Romulans were, causing trouble in the neutral zone, but that no one had ever seen a Romulan. They didn't even know what they looked like. And then it was this big reveal that they look like Vulcans.
Well, there's a big reveal in this episode too, so.
Right, but they have to stick to their canon on this one that the Federation doesn't know what a Romulan looks like yet.
Okay. Well, in all fairness, I'm not a huge original series fan, so I honestly don't remember the history of that, so I wrote down a little history of the Romulans, so we can go over that a little bit too. What we see next is Pike, Una, Spock, and one of the colonists from this outpost are in this meeting room. The colonist mentions that they are having supply chain issues, most likely because they're so far out in space they just don't have the supplies that they need, which is part of the reason the Enterprise is there.
Yeah, this guy's the commander of the station.
Of the outpost.
They have these various, they're not quite star bases. They're like, these stations, listening posts, I guess you'd say, built into these asteroids along the neutral zone. So he's the commander of this one that they're currently guarding.
They're having a discussion about supply chain issues. He mentions that they're going to give him some supplies and some matter replicators, and the outpost guy is pretty happy. Right about then, his son sort of kind of runs in, and he's all excited to meet Captain Pike. And I think the dad at one point mentions that, he's got a model of the Enterprise in his bedroom. So this kid is kind of a Starfleet nerd. He wants to join Starfleet later. And when the kid walks over and introduces himself to Pike, he basically tells him his name, and Pike realizes that this boy is one of the cadets from his flashback that ends up dying. So Pike kind of immediately freaks out, and diplomatically he steps out because he's a little taken aback that he's going to be involved in this kid's death in the future.
Yeah, he's shook.
Yeah, he gets up and leaves. He says, I'm a little under the weather. I'm gonna take off, and he's like, you can deal with Spock, and he just gets up, and he's clearly very unhappy. And when we get back, so we see it cuts to Pike in his quarters, and he's giving dictation to the computer. I've never actually seen anyone on Star Trek do this. He says, "Computer, take dictation." Like he's going to write a letter. Usually like when they do Captain's Log, they just, or when they want to record something, I guess.
We've never really heard how they even start that.
Yeah. Anyway, the point is he says, "Computer, take dictation." And he starts a letter, and he's writing a letter to this kid. in the future is essentially what he's going to do. And he's going to tell this kid, you need to avoid me or do whatever. He's trying to keep this kid from getting killed.
Right.
And then sort of out of nowhere, like this dark Pike or this future Pike appears, and he's wearing a not bright red. He's wearing like a blood red Starfleet uniform, and it has some insignia that I've never seen on a Star Trek uniform before.
It's the uniforms from the original series movies.
Oh, okay. It's clearly
I recognize that. Yeah,
it's clearly very different than what we're used to. So you get the dichotomy that these are two very different people.
We know. Yeah, we can tell by that he's come from the future, because those are the uniforms that debuted in Wrath of Khan.
I recognized it from like Star Trek Generations, but I guess it's in most of the movies.
Yeah,
for that like really ruffly collar thing. Yeah, it's.
The future Pike tells Pike or current Pike, whatever you want to call him, that he says, "Don't write that letter. You're going to write this letter to this kid and tell him not to join Starfleet or whatever." And he says it'll wreck the future. So he's warning him. He
specifically tells him that you're going to write letters to all of these kids and you're going to save them and yourself.
Right.
But that there are consequences to that.
So he mentions that future Pike mentions that 2 cadets die in the accident 7 years in the future. So if you'll remember at the beginning of the series, Pike had 10 years left until his premonition comes true. So apparently we've passed 3 years of time has passed since that. So the clock is ticking. So right about then, future Pike kind of gets, I guess it's out of his pocket. It wasn't clear where it came from. He gets this like wooden box out, and he shows current Pike this time crystal, this green looking gem thing, right?
Yeah. Now I'm assuming this is something that came up in Discovery at some point. This whole idea of these Klingon monks that have the power to travel through time. I mean, because I still don't know as a viewer of just Star Trek Strange New Worlds, I have no idea how Captain Pike knows his future, which is pretty frustrating to me. I mean, I feel like they should have given some indication of what's going on here for the people who didn't see Discovery.
That is a good point. I mean, I did see that section of Discovery, and it wasn't particularly memorable. I mean, well, in my defense, most of Discovery wasn't memorable, so that doesn't particularly stand out. But that is a good point. They should at least give like a 10-second overview of how this happened.
Something. I mean, I know he had some experience where he saw his future, and that's really the most important piece of information. And I know they've mentioned these Klingon monks a couple times, but I don't know. Why do these Klingon monks have the ability to travel through time? That's pretty weird. Like, you'd think if the Klingons had time travel, they'd have used it to take over the galaxy by now, but who knows?
Well, I just assumed it was like the visions like Anakin got of Padme dying, just visions that are haunting him, and he takes great stock in them. They're so real. That's the extent that I got. But yeah, it's not a great element to take from the prequels.
I mean, for all intents and purposes, it doesn't really matter for this show. I mean, we just know that Pike does know his future, and he's clearly been ravaged by it this whole season as he tries to deal with it. And so now he's got a chance, to either learn a little bit more about it or perhaps change his future. So,
right, but this isn't just visions. Like future Pike is present on the Enterprise in his quarters, so. They can apparently send someone back in time. But
what current Pike ends up doing is, that he touches the crystal, and then it cuts to a new scene, and you see Pike, and he's in front of a group of Starfleet personnel, on a loading bay or something, and you realize that he's performing a wedding, and he's in the middle. He's at the podium, and he's mid-sentence, and then he kind of, I don't want to say beams in, that's the wrong word, but he becomes aware in this, and then he's kind of freaked out that he's got to do this wedding, and he stumbles through a couple lines, and then all of a sudden red alert goes off, and Pike under his breath goes, "Oh, thank God."
Right.
And then,
thank God the lives of my entire crew are in danger. get out of this public speaking engagement.
He was like, he didn't know the bride and groom's name, but Red Alert was better because,
So real quick though, we should talk about specifically why he's coming to the future here. His, future Pike tells him that, he's been warned by these Klingon monks that his actions of changing the past have resulted in this terrible future. But he needs to know basically what exactly it is that he's doing that's causing this.
Or the alternative was to just kill him, right? He's like, he convinced him.
Yeah, the Klingons were just going to kill him. And he said, well, wait, hang on. I'll just show him what's going to happen. And then he'll be willing to not change things like he was gonna. So he's here to see, what this horrible future is that is going to take place because he changed the past.
I mean, it's sort of a Ghost of Christmas Present, Past, and Future
Right.
thing where he's going to go see what his actions. Yeah.
So he says, to find out what this terrible future is, I have to live it. Is some or the line something along those lines.
We cut to the bridge and we hear that Outpost 4 has sent a message or sent a distress call, I believe, and then went silent. They are about 8 minutes away from Outpost 4, so they're not right on top of it. But Ortegas is convinced that it is the quote fingers same attacker. And then she pauses and she says the Romulans. So again, he kind of came into this that apparently in this timeline, the Romulans had already been attacking this outpost or some of the other outposts. So they are very aware of the Romulans in this time frame, whereas in the present timeline, the Romulans are boogeymen that no one has seen in 100 years.
Well, even in this timeline, they haven't seen them yet.
Well, I mean, she
comes up later when they see them for the first time. So,
well, okay. When I say see, yeah, you're right. Visually, they haven't seen them, but Ortegas was very aware that they were the Romulans. It wasn't like, hey, there's an unknown ship attacking this outpost.
Yeah, we've jumped into the middle of this like weeks-long crisis where the Romulans have been attacking these outposts on the neutral zone.
So we cut to the ready room and we see Spock and Pike. And he's getting some information from Spock about, where he is. And Spock mentions that it's 2266, which is 7 years in the future from where he was. So this is going to be essentially the end, most likely his death or very soon after this event. So what we're setting up for is that there is some sort of major event that triggers, this catastrophe. And again, that's what Pike is here to learn about.
Yeah.
7 years is a nice number of seasons. 7 seasons. I don't know.
Well, I mean, that it is worth mentioning that pretty much all of the major Star Trek series did go 7 seasons, right? I mean, Next Generation went 7 seasons, Voyager went 7 seasons, Deep Space Nine went 7 seasons.
Yeah,
and I think
that was the formula they were sticking to back then. The plan was for Enterprise to go 7 seasons.
Yeah, right. So Pike is a little out of it because he's just, essentially appeared in this timeline and he's trying to get caught up. And Spock asks him if he's feeling okay, and he's like, "Yeah, no, it's fine. I just did some time traveling." And and Spock's line is, "Approaching this logically, time travel seems a less likely solution than you are compromised mentally." So
which is true. It's much more likely that he's out of it than he's actually traveled through time.
Especially as the captain of a ship, right? You don't. At one point, Spock says he offers to take command. He's like, "Look, you're not in your right mind." As the
well, he doesn't offer. He says, "Hey, as the first officer, it's my duty to relieve you of command since you've just admitted that you're traveling through time. So either something weird's going on with you, or you're crazy. Either way, you shouldn't be the captain right now."
Ike just immediately offers up. He's like, "Hey, how about a mind meld, and then I can prove that I'm not crazy." So they're playing fast and loose with the mind melds in this.
Yeah.
In previous Star Trek, like a mind meld was very, I want to say, traumatic. It's very last resort.
Yeah, and it's kind of taboo to just do it. It's not like it's a very intimate thing, which the Vulcans aren't like super comfortable with. So you don't just do a mind meld with anybody. It's not something you do casually. And
Right.
so, for him to suggest it as just this kind of routine thing, and for Spock to agree to that, kind of shows how close Spock and Pike are. That Spock doesn't really even hesitate; he just says, "Yeah, okay, we can do that."
So that's what they do. Spock mind melds with Pike and, essentially reads his mind and sees, the flashbacks of the kids, and he sees Pike, burned, all the things that Pike has been seeing for years, and realizes that he's not crazy. And so they have a quick discussion, and Spock makes the suggestion about not changing what he would normally do. He says, now that you know this and that you're in the future, you should not go out of your way to try and change things. If you're just here to view this and see that, you need to go along with, the normal routine, essentially, is what he tells him.
Right. He's trying to figure out what it is that I do in the future that causes the problem. So he needs to act as he would.
So they cut back to the bridge now, and they have arrived at Outpost 4. And there is, it's in disarray. And it puts the ship puts the bridge on alarm a little bit. And at one point there's mention, what's the closest other ship in case we need some backup. And it turns out that the USS Farragut is a couple hours away. So there are no ships that are immediately available to help them. But that ship, it is mentioned, that's La'an's ship is what they say. Right. So there's okay, so that's also worth mentioning. So La'an is not on this ship. Apparently, in this universe, she has her own ship, and Spock is number one. It's not Una. Una is not on the bridge of this ship.
Yeah, at one point, someone or Spock refers to himself as number one.
Right.
And Pike's a little taken aback, but he doesn't ask at this point, "Where's Una?" It's one note I'll give here. I don't think we need to worry about spoilers. Hopefully, everybody listening to this has watched the episode. But we're gonna if you have a super nerd Star Trek level of knowledge at this point, then we know kind of what the jig is for this episode, because this is the plot from that episode, Balance of Terror, from the original series, where the Romulans are attacking these bases on the neutral zone.
Can you give us a summary of that? Because I don't have any recollection of that.
So it's the setup is just like this. The Romulans have been attacking these bases on the neutral zone. The Enterprise is sent out there to kind of patrol the area. They end up running across this cloaked Romulan ship that is firing this plasma weapon at the outpost and destroys one. And then they pursue it into the neutral zone to basically kind of go, hey, you can't just get away with this. We're not gonna let you come and attack us with impunity. And Kirk, violates his orders by crossing into the neutral zone. And then they have this kind of cat and mouse game in a nebula, and they end up kind of fighting to a standstill. And the Enterprise makes contact with that other ship, and Kirk kind of says, hey, look, we're not getting anything out of this. We're just killing each other. Let's just agree to go back to our own sides of the neutral zone and call it a day. And the other ship responds on screen. They see the Romulans for the first time. It's this big reveal. They're all shocked. Spock is shook because he didn't, the Vulcans didn't know about this. And they basically say...
He does the eyebrow raise.
Oh, yeah, totally. And the Romulans basically say, hey, okay, we'll take your deal, but just know that we're back, baby. We're a power in the quadrant again, and we're not just going to sit quietly for another 100 years, so you're going to hear from us soon. And then that's the end of the episode. So the fact that this is the plot of that episode, but Pike is captain of the Enterprise, tells us that right there is the thing that has changed. That Kirk is not captaining the Enterprise at this point, but Pike is.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah, actually.
Do you remember that, or did you have to look that up?
No, I remembered that.
I mean, seriously, what did you have a memory? It blows me away, your memory. I mean, seriously, it's been 20 years since you've seen that, right? Like, how do you remember?
I watched through the original series maybe 5 years ago, something like that.
Okay.
But that's also probably my favorite episode of the original series, so I remember it pretty well.
Okay.
I don't have that level of remembrance of 90% of the original series episodes.
Okay, fair enough.
It just happens to be one that I know really well.
I just was curious if you had a freakish memory or not.
No.
But that's a great way to utilize a prequel, a series, and time travel at the same time. I don't know if
Right.
I've seen something like that before, but
They're telling the same story from a different point of view, or with a minor change.
yeah,
They've done stuff like this before. I mean, this one's a lot more heavy, but like DS9 did that episode where they have to go back in time to The Trouble with Tribbles.
Okay.
And it's, we're seeing the same stuff happen, but from the perspective of the DS9 characters. And
right.
They're trying to, keep the original folks from figuring out what's going on and deal with the same situation. Anyway, they've done stuff like that before, but this is a little different where it's, if you didn't know about that original series episode, you'd be fine. You don't need to know about it to enjoy this one. But if you do, there's a bit more going on here for you.
I did not know about that original series episode, and I really enjoyed this episode. So yeah, like you said, it does
kind of give away the game right out of the gate that the change is that Pike is captaining the Enterprise here rather than Kirk.
Sure.
And that's why things are going to go south.
All right. So to circle back to the episode, the outpost contacts them because, they have arrived, and the outpost is really messed up. He mentions that the deflector shields were on maximum, but it didn't do anything. Like whatever weapon that these Romulans had basically just destroyed the whole base. Like there's just nothing left. And, right as he's explaining, how powerful the Romulans are, we see a cloaked Romulan warbird. It uncloaks and fires and basically destroys what's left of the outpost.
Has a pretty big shockwave as it explodes everywhere.
Yeah, it's pretty gnarly, and it's a non-standard Star Trek weapon. Normally you see phasers or torpedoes. This is clearly an energy weapon. I think they call it a plasma weapon.
Yeah.
So it looks and behaves a little. This is a new weapon, I should say.
Yeah, and real quick, I want to make a note here. This is kind of the space battle portion of the episode is mostly over at this point. I want to say they did some really cool stuff with just the geometry, I guess you'd say, of a three-dimensional space in this episode. We had a lot of shots where the various ships and bases and whatnot are not perfectly aligned with each other. In space, if two ships come upon each other, they're not going to be oriented perfectly. One of them is going to be, at whatever 27 degrees off and tilted a different direction. I mean, they're never going to. That always kind of bugged me about,
right.
Whenever they encounter anybody, they're perfectly oriented with each other for the shot. But in this case, we see in the start of the episode, we have the two Federation ships orbiting the base, and they're not in line with each other. They're kind of askance from each other. We see that as the Enterprise comes in to return to the base here before it gets destroyed, that it's not perfectly upright, if that makes sense. It's off center a bit. So I just like that they were getting creative with the visuals here and not having the same old everything's in two dimensions.
I didn't catch that, but that is a really good point. Yeah. Spock makes mention that because they are at this point they are unfamiliar with cloaking technology, and Spock essentially tells the audience, but he tells the bridge crew, but he's really telling the audience. He's like, "Oh, it's kind of weird that they had to uncloak to shoot. Why not just shoot cloaked?" So, I mean, just to clarify, if you're not familiar, it's just the Romulans that have cloaking technology, at least originally, right? I mean, it's not a Klingon or a Federation thing. And the Romulan, just the way the cloaking technology works is they are unable to fire their weapons while they are cloaked. So they have to uncloak, temporarily make themselves vulnerable, shoot, and then cloak again.
Right.
The outpost is basically completely destroyed at this point. Right about then, the USS Farragut contacts them, and we see that James T. Kirk is the captain of that ship, and he offers help. So there is a discussion about what they're going to do now because the Romulans have cloaked again and they can't see them and they can't pick them up on sensors. and Spock mentions that they might be able to detect them based on the light refraction of the stars going around the ships or through the ships. So they're trying to figure out if they can track these guys. And this was something I didn't remember. I certainly didn't remember, was that I think Spock says that the cloak may work both ways, meaning we can't see them, but they can't see out. That they're essentially flying blind.
Yeah, he says that the cloak probably takes so much power that they're not able to utilize their sensors very well while it's operating. So, yeah, that's their speculation, is that they can't see. I mean, they have an idea of what's around because, they know what's in the vicinity before they cloak, but then they can't see anything in real time. So they know where that asteroid was and they know what its trajectory was. And in theory, they know where it is right now. But if somebody came along and blew it up, they wouldn't know that.
I mean, so you could set a course, cloak, and then, come out of cloak every couple minutes just to check that you're on course.
Yeah, or just, well, you'd know. I mean, you know your course, you know your trajectory, you know where the various objects in space are around you when you go into cloak. So as long as something doesn't happen to alter one of those objects or the trajectory, you know where everything is.
I believe the cloaking technology, at least canonically, you can't go to warp while cloaked either. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Does that theory get nixed later on because of the flanking that they do? Is that maybe a theory that's kind of not true?
Well, again, this is the first time that I've seen where the Romulans are not able necessarily to see outbound. So I'm wondering if perhaps that's just Spock guessing incorrectly, maybe.
No, I mean that's what the case was in the original series episode as well. It's just that this is the early form of the technology, so it's not seen in the original series much at all. And then in Next Generation, I can't remember it's 80 years later or something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
So and then that's the timeline where most of our knowledge of the cloaking technology comes from, and at that point it's better. And yeah, they can basically do everything except fire their weapons when they're cloaked.
There's just one point later in the episode where the Romulans get the jump on them because of this kind of theory that they assume that they don't know where they are,
Yeah.
Right.
Fails. So I'm wondering if
it's not
clear.
They
don't really explain how the Romulans knew where they were versus if they just guessed, or they don't go into that. So.
Well, they're trying to decide what they're going to do. Like, are they going to attempt to pursue this Romulan ship? Are they going to, run because this thing outguns them? And I think it's
first, there's an interesting moment. As soon as they get, Kirk shows up, they hail him. He says, "Hey, here I am. I'm here to help out." And then as soon as they get off the call, Pike says, "Somebody get Sam Kirk to my ready room right now." And so we get a scene with him basically grilling Sam Kirk about, "Hey, what's your brother's deal? Can I trust him? Is he?" It was pretty interesting. He's asking some pretty loaded questions about a fellow captain.
Yeah, he basically asks him how crazy or unhinged is your brother, because I've heard some stories and I don't want to know what I'm getting myself into. Sam Kirk's line is, he does like to bend the rules sometimes, and then he pauses and he says, "No, more like all the time."
Yeah, which is kind of interesting because the whole Kirk is a maverick who breaks the rules and just does whatever he wants is really more of a movie Kirk thing. In the original series episodes, Kirk's pretty by the book. Like, in particular, this episode, Balance of Terror, where he follows this Romulan warbird into the neutral zone against orders. Spock is kind of like, what the hell are you doing? Like, this isn't like you. You don't do this kind of thing. And Kirk says, "Yeah, like I'm not wild about this. I'm not comfortable breaking chain of command, but the situation dictates that we do this. So here we go." But he's not cavalier about it. He's like, "Yeah, I probably shouldn't be doing this. This isn't great. I don't like this, but I just I have no choice. I have to."
there's a discussion about what they're going to do, or whether or not they're going to follow this Romulan ship or not, and whether or not they're going to attack it if they do follow it. And there's mention that they cannot attack this Romulan warbird at all, because that would be considered a declaration of war. And if they did that, then Starfleet would consider them, being the Enterprise, expendable, which seems really kind of crazy to me. Like this enemy you haven't seen in 100 years, but it's clearly an enemy of the Federation, comes out of nowhere. And at this point, they've blown up at least one outpost, but probably a couple, and attacked you. And you're basically saying I can't defend myself, otherwise it's going to be a declaration of war, and you're going to leave me out here.
We can't provoke these guys, and if we do, then Starfleet's going to just disavow us and claim that we weren't acting on behalf of the Federation. And this whole like Pike desperate for peace thing is a bit much in this situation, where it'd be one thing if they had reports of people attacking these outposts and they weren't quite sure yet what was happening, but when they just literally saw them destroy this Federation outpost and murder who knows how many Federation citizens, the idea that he's like, oh, we don't want to start an incident here, is a little bit weird.
I mean, they've got it essentially recorded. I mean, on their ship's computer, so you could easily take that to Starfleet and go, look, like this is what we're dealing with.
Right.
I kind of had the opposite take, like completely opposite. I thought, yeah, it's 100-year war, and we know that they're hostile. What good is it to just attack and go that avenue? Why not try diplomacy, which doesn't seem to be an option that has been tried at all? That seemed more wise to me than just attacking.
Well, I mean, they're shooting at them. It's kind of hard to have negotiations when you're being shot at.
Well,
but then you trigger, war, right? Yeah.
Pike disagrees with you, Ben. I mean, he clearly wanted to try diplomacy. So.
Right. No, I mean, I totally get the idea that you want to try to not trigger war, but they've already triggered war. They just killed a whole bunch of people. Like any government would be at war at that point. There's no going back from that.
Yeah, but that's not how it actually happens. A lot of times things get overstepped, and
not like that, dude. If somebody blew up a U.S. military installation, we'd be at war.
Oh, right. I mean, that's what happened with Pearl Harbor, right? I mean, they bombed a couple of submarines.
Oh, well, they did more than that.
Well, I'm just saying. I mean, as far as
they killed several thousand sailors and sank most of our fleet, but
it was zero discussion. It was like, all right, we're going to war. Like this is it, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, to tie into current events here, I mean, that's one of the reasons that the NATO countries are so reluctant to, they'll give Ukraine weapons, but they're not going to put any forces on the ground there, because if any of them get attacked, that's it. We're at war.
Yeah. So they make mention they pick up a signal that's beamed off, or that's reflected off this comet, that they don't believe the Romulans wanted them necessarily to see. Right about then, James T. Kirk beams on board because, and they're all in the meeting room, and then they're discussing what they're going to do with the Romulans, because now they have two ships. They have the Farragut and the Enterprise, and are they going to pursue this? Are they going to flank them? What are they going to do? And they pull up this message that they found, and we see it's a visual message. And you see that the Romulans look very similar visually to Vulcans, and Spock is surprised to see that and makes mention of that, actually.
Yeah, everybody kind of turns to look at Spock like, what the hell, man? And he gives the eyebrow. Yeah, and they're immediately pretty taken aback by that, and there's some kind of discussion about what, did you know about this? And Spock says, no, I had no idea.
It's worth noting that, I mean, the Vulcans are known for being a peaceful people and a logical people, and they're very, and the Vulcans are pretty much the direct opposite. They're very rash and violent. So the dichotomy there is seeing these two people that look very similar, but are, diametrically opposed in their actions.
Right. And as it starts, I wouldn't say it gets heated, but it's getting a little tense for sure. And Kirk, to his credit, says, hey, hold on here. We don't even know for sure that they didn't intend for us to see that. Maybe they're just trying to foster resentment and drive a wedge between these two founding members of the Federation.
Or maybe they did, doesn't one of them mention that maybe they purposely leaked this thinking that we wouldn't know, and then it would, it would destabilize us. Yeah. So there's some back and
Kirk
forth.
Says is, maybe they leaked this so that it would, sow distrust between humans and Vulcans.
Do you know the background of the Romulans, Ben?
I mean, they're former there was a colony of Vulcan that basically broke away and did their own thing. When the Vulcans turned to logic, they just kept doing their warrior culture thing.
I looked it up. So the Romulans were biological cousins of the Vulcans, and they had their own home planet. They had the planet Romulus, whereas the Vulcans' home planet was Vulcan. So they are genetically similar. Like you said, I think they're an offshoot. And they are descended from those who rejected Surak's reforms. Do you know who Surak was?
Yeah,
Shut up. You do not, really.
Yeah, I know I do. He's mentioned a lot. God. He's the founder of the Vulcan society based on logic. So.
Oh my gosh, I'm impressed. I'm not going to lie. I'm just impressed.
Yeah. So way back when the Vulcans had an empire, basically they had a spacefaring culture that was conquering other races. And then Surak started this movement to switch to logic. Everybody on Vulcan went along with that, but some of the folks, kind of out on the edges of the empire, I guess you would say, were like, nah, we're not down with that. We're going to start our own deal. So then they have their new home planet of Romulus and start the Romulan Empire.
According to the internet, Surak was a legendary Vulcan philosopher, scientist, and logistician. He's considered the greatest of all who ever lived on Vulcan and the father of modern Vulcan's civilization. So yeah, he's
apparently very persuasive because he convinced everybody to stop being so emotional and just be a person of pure logic. I don't know how well that would go down in most cases.
I mean, the whole idea of being purely logical, I mean, it's great in theory, but just the idea of not being emotional at all when it's such a natural reaction, no one chooses to be emotional, no one chooses to get angry or sad, you know what I mean? Like, it's to cut that off would be, like you said, it would be that'd be a tough sell.
Yeah.
Well, it's futile. Everything comes down to subjectivity and like experience, and not everything is a math equation. Like
at one point, so they're all sitting around this table discussing what they're going to do, and Mbenga questions whether or not he questions attacking them because that would be an act of war. And I wrote down, why is Mbenga here? Like, I mean, I get it. He's the doctor and he's like a high up official, but I mean, this is a tactical mission. I don't know what input he really has here. I don't recall other Star Treks where, Crusher is planning missions or,
Well, he had a 10-episode contract. That's why he's here.
You think that? Yeah. Okay. That could be it. Well, he had a couple scenes in sickbay. He didn't. Anyway, I just thought it was weird that the doctor was there talking about whether or not they're going to go to war, but whatever.
Yeah, you're right. Crusher isn't in those meetings in Next Generation.
You're trying to think like Sisko never defers to Bashir, right? I mean, Kirk never defers to Bones.
No, he does, but that's a different situation where, the Star Trek shows after the original are much more of a, it's a much more collaborative workplace. They get the crew, they have a conference room, they get together and discuss things. Whereas in the original series, Kirk's the captain and he's calling all the shots. There's not much discussion. He asks Spock for, what are your sensors saying? And then he says, all right, this is what we're going to do. And that's it. But McCoy is, that they've been friends for a long time and he's not, I'm just a country doctor, damn it. So He's not terribly impressed with chain of command or Kirk's authority. So McCoy is kind of the foil to Kirk's, by the book captain authority figure. So he's kind of the I don't know, the conscience of the Enterprise in the original series, something like that.
Yeah, that's probably a good description.
So he's got a different role, and he's one of the 3 stars of the show too. Whereas the Doctor has more of a background role in the future shows. So
from a military, like a hierarchy point of view, it seems weird to me that the Doctor would be there. That's the only point I was making.
Well, they don't have a counselor, Deanna Troi, to like give the
right
the dovish.
Right. That's a good point. I mean, Deanna Troi was involved in a lot of that stuff, and Crusher wasn't, but whatever. So they're going around the table essentially talking about, what they're going to do, and everybody's getting their vote in. And Spock, of all people, says that he thinks that they should attack this ship. And his line is, Vulcan, like Earth, had its aggressive colonizing period. Savage, even by human standards. So even everyone at the table is kind of surprised that Spock, of all people, would say this. But what Spock is saying is that, look, these guys are so violent. If we don't take them out now, we're going to regret it later. Like this, there's no negotiating with these people.
Well, and he specifically says that their whole outlook is one of strength over weakness. And so logically, if we show them anything but strength, they're going to just use that as an excuse to attack us again.
Right. James Kirk suggests a pincer attack. They mentioned that they're going to be flying through the tail of this comet up ahead, and they think that they will see reflections of the ship in the tail of the comet, and they can use that to determine exactly where the ship is. So they are going to they're going to do a pincer attack. They're going to attack from both sides. Kirk and Pike agree to neutralize and not destroy the Romulan ship. Kirk clearly wanted to destroy it. Pike wants to negotiate with them, but they agree to meet in the middle and neutralize the ship instead of destroying it.
Right.
Unfortunately, it doesn't work. They get up to the comet and they're expecting the Romulan ship to fly through the tail and disrupt and it doesn't show up. And ultimately what ends up happening is the Romulans have outsmarted them, and they uncloak behind the Farragut, and they open fire on the Farragut, and the Farragut just gets pretty boned. There's not a whole lot left of it. I mean, it's pretty cut and dry.
Yeah, a big chunk of the saucer section's blown up, and it's not in good shape.
Yeah, so I think Kirk gets on. Like he yells at Pike, hey, come help me out, start shooting, do whatever. And I made mention, or I noted that the phasers that the Enterprise shoots in this, they are not like traditional like laser style light phasers that I've seen in the other shows. They look a lot more like Star Wars phasers, and it had a different sound, and they traveled A to B instead of just being like a straight line of light. Did you notice that?
Yeah, that's from the J.J. Abrams movies. They kind of redesigned the effect to be more like a Star Wars blaster than a beam like you're talking about. So yeah, that we're getting these different style phasers that, I mean, granted they look cooler, they sound cooler. I'll give them that.
I didn't have a problem with it. I just noted that it was different than I was expecting, right? I mean, if you've watched any Next Generation or Void, any of the other shows, I mean, the phasers always look very
it's a continuous beam like a laser rather than a projectile.
The Enterprise fires at the Romulan ship. They kind of hit it in a glancing shot. They do some damage to it, but nothing crazy. And then the Romulan ship shoots its plasma weapon and hits the Enterprise. And they I think Pike is surprised. Why are we still? That should have destroyed us. We saw that same weapon hit the outpost and it destroyed it. Why are we still flying? And they suggest that perhaps it was because the weapon was fired at distance, and perhaps it's not as deadly at distance.
Yeah, so it dissipates the farther away you are.
I think at one point, they scan the Farragut and they determine that it's a lost cause, and that the Farragut has 5 minutes of life support left, and then the ship is just going to be completely uninhabitable. So they race to beam everyone off the Farragut on board the Enterprise. We see a scene where La'an beams on board in the transporter room, and she immediately like hugs Pike. Oh, and her hair is down. It's not up in the traditional kind of like conservative La'an that we see in this season.
Yeah, and she seems a lot more relaxed.
Yeah, and I think she hugs Pike, and Pike is kind of taken aback because she's not warm and fuzzy.
He's like, "Who are you, and what have you done with Luan?"
And I'm not sure where this comes from, but Pike asks about Una. He says, "When was the last time you talked to Una?" I mean, so he must realize that she's not on the Enterprise, so she's not in this timeline. I don't know why he decides to ask
anybody yet.
Yeah.
I don't know why all of a sudden he asks her. It's a little strange.
I mean, there was that scene in the pilot where La'an and Una were friends and they'd known each other, and Pike was surprised. So maybe he's drawing the connection that they're friends in this universe too. Anyway, the point is that La'an says that Una isn't allowed any contact. So there's no more explanation yet. But Una is off the grid.
Yeah.
We see Pike and James Kirk in his ready room, and Kirk is angry. He thinks that Pike kind of messed up that mission, and that I think what he says, you flinched and you weren't aggressive enough. There was, like a 1 second delay, and that let the Romulans get the jump on us. And, it ultimately ended up, in the destruction of my ship. And he's kind of getting in Pike's face, and he's clearly not happy.
Yeah, which doesn't really jive with what we saw.
Right.
Like, it didn't look like there was some opportunity to prevent that the Enterprise didn't take. So I'm not sure exactly what Kirk's point is here.
I do think Pike has a great line, because Kirk is hot, and he's getting in his face. And Pike takes it, and then he looks at him in the eye after, he takes a breath, and he goes, "We may have different points of view, but do not question my combat readiness, Captain." So he's telling Kirk, like, "Hey, don't get in my face. I did what I had to do."
Yeah, and Kirk says something along the lines of, "Hey, well, clearly one of us is more willing to take, we just have a difference of opinion about our tactics." And Pike says, "Well, if you mean that you're more willing to take risks, I'll grant you that, but I'm also the one who still has a ship."
Yeah, his line is, "If you're saying you're more willing to take risks than I am, I don't disagree. And let me remind you that you're saying that on my ship after yours has been destroyed."
Yeah, one, ouch.
Right.
That's rough, because it just happened.
Right, too soon.
But also, yeah, I don't think at least from what I saw, there was no way for Kirk to avoid that. The Romulan shows up right behind him, blasts him. What's he supposed to do?
I think it's just Kirk being hot.
Yeah, I know, but Pike's slamming him for, but Kirk didn't take a risk there. They came up with a plan together, and they were executing it as they agreed to. Kirk didn't do any, crazy Maverick thing. And then it went bad, and he lost his ship, but it wasn't because he took some stupid risk. So it's just a weird thing to say.
Yeah. I just wrote down, I did like that Pike stood up for himself, and he was like, "Look, dude,
sure.
You want to go in guns blazing, that's not my style, but don't get in my face when it doesn't work." So
yeah, no, and Kirk's out. They're both out of line here. Kirk's more out of line because he comes in going like, "What's your problem? You didn't engage him." Yeah. And Pike's kind of like, "I don't know what you're talking about." Like, what was I supposed to do? The second that I had a chance to do anything, I did. I started shooting at him. What more do you want?
Let's take a vote right now. Who's Team Pike?
Oh man, that's tough.
Oh, you mean in this argument or just in general?
In general.
Oh, in general, definitely Team Pike. He's a great captain. Kirk is he's too hot.
I think I'm Team Kirk.
Really?
Yeah, I'll get more into why in a bit here, but so yeah, the other thing though is not only did Pike respond by shooting at the Romulans, but he's warned by I can't remember if it's Spock or Tegas or someone who basically says, "Hey, we're so far away right now that if you start shooting at them, you might hit the Farragut."
Right.
And Pike still says, "Nope, go ahead and shoot." So he's willing to take a risk there and open fire on the Romulans, even though there's a chance he might hit the Federation ship. So I gotta say, Kirk's in the wrong here, claiming that Pike wasn't willing to engage and take some risks.
Kirk. That's what Kirk was scolding him for, was hesitating in that instance where he might
right,
hit
but
the
it didn't.
target, right?
I mean, it sure didn't seem like he did.
Yeah, but he hesitated, and that's the main gripe he has, is that he hesitated half a moment, right?
He hesitated after the Farragut was already basically destroyed. It was like,
right, but
and frankly, I don't know. I mean, how does Kirk even know he hesitated if he did? Like,
yeah, that's a good point, because from his point of view, right.
Anyway, yeah, it was just a weird. I feel like they needed to have a different scenario where there was an opportunity to attack that Pike didn't take, but Kirk did. But in the process, then the Farragut gets destroyed, and then you can have this conversation and this conflict. But when they followed the plan exactly that they set up, and then Pike's given Kirk flack about losing his ship, and Kirk's given Pike flack about not engaging when he did engage. It was weird.
Yeah, that's fair.
I wanted to just shake both of them and go, like, none of you are making any sense here.
The next thing we see, we cut to the bridge, and Pike decides to send the Romulans a hail. He asks Uhura to raise them in a hail. And Uhura kind of looks, she's like, really? Like, they haven't answered any of our hails yet. Why would they answer now? Because, I mean, they just kicked our butts, essentially. It's mentioned that the Warbird has been damaged because the Enterprise did hit it, and it is spitting out trilithium fragments now. So that is definitely something that the Enterprise can track. It's essentially leaving an oil slick behind that they can track it easily now. The Romulans respond to the hail, which is a little bit surprising. And Pike offers the Romulans a 2-hour ceasefire. The Romulans kind of go back and forth on whether or not they're going to do it. They make mention that this is what makes humans weak, is that they don't just immediately attack. But they agree, and so they decide, because both ships are pretty damaged, that they're going to take 2 hours to stop and think and repair their ships, and then come back in 2 hours and figure out what they want to do. Ortegas has a line here where, after the view screen is down, she's really hot, and she says that we can't let them get away. I don't know, we don't have a whole lot of ships. The phasers are, not the best right now, but this is our only chance. We need to go after them and take them out now. And she kind of pushes that with Pike, and Pike full on yells at her.
Well, first he just says, "Hey, no, we're gonna take a minute here," and she says, he kind of basically says, "Hey, cool it. It's that's not what we're gonna do." He keeps his cool, and then she doubles down. She turns around from her console and says, "You can't trust them. You have to attack them now." And then he kind of loses it, and
he full on puts her in her place, and he says, "Erica, stand down." And then she then she does. But I just made note that was a really powerful.
He yells at her. I mean, he doesn't just say it loud. He yells at her, and part of me was going like, yeah, you're really pushing it here. You're openly questioning the captain's orders on the bridge. That's not a good move. But he's also, you're also on first name basis with him, and he's calling you Erica, and you're calling him Chris. So yeah, I'm not surprised that the unit discipline's a little bit low here, Pike.
What we see, there's a quick cut to the Romulan ship. So they are on this 2-hour ceasefire, and they're debating about what they're going to do. The captain wants to repair the engines, and the second in command wants to repair the weapon systems and then go after the Enterprise. So there's a little back and forth here. Ultimately, the captain wins out, and they decide to repair the engines.
Yeah, and we get the sense that he's, he's not necessarily afraid of conflict, but he's definitely leery about starting a major conflict with the Federation.
Yes.
He doesn't, he's not afraid to go and do some raids on the outposts and blow some stuff up, but he doesn't want an all-out war. He seems to sense that, you guys are kind of bloodthirsty for this, but it's not going to go as well as you think it's gonna. And his second in command is, so basically we have the parallel here of Pike and Erica and this Romulan captain and his first officer, where the younger folks are screaming for blood, and the more seasoned officers are going like, "Hey, we're going to do our duty here, but if we can avoid starting a war, let's do that."
Oh, I didn't put that to. Yeah, that's a good point. That the older more grizzled, I suppose you could say, captains were much more reluctant than the upstart cadets. Actually, at one point, it's worth mentioning, doesn't the Romulan captain say, "What is this? Like your third mission or your third ship?" Like it's
yeah.
He points out that the first in command or the second in command is very green, essentially.
Yeah.
Is this where he talks about his? He talks to him about his father, like his second in command.
Yes,
and
yes.
how he worked with his father and had a mission, and kind of something he learned from where his father died, type thing.
Yeah, it's his uncle, and he says that he served with him, and he was the second in command on a ship, and his commander was a fool and made this reckless attack that gained them nothing, and they died for nothing. But I don't know if we ever get a name for Romulan second in command dude who's on this ship here, but he basically says, well, they were attacking. That's what they should have done. It doesn't really matter whether they died or not. That's, you always got to attack.
Yeah, I really appreciated this kind of behind the scenes or behind the curtain of the bad guys, the baddies, and the culture there. You can tell it's a very aggressive culture. They're very, hawkish. Right. But there's still conversation. They're not just like blindly attacking like animals. They actually have some.
Yeah, they're not just bloodthirsty monsters. Like he's got a plan here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's in that I'm gonna keep banging this drum, but in that original series episode that this is based on, there's a similar dynamic where the Romulan commander is wanting to try to avoid this all-out war, and his second in command keeps pushing him to, we gotta attack. So that whole dynamic is from that original episode as well. Fun fact, the actor who plays the Romulan commander in that episode is Mark Leonard, who would go on to play Sarek, Spock's father.
Oh, interesting.
So his first Star Trek role was as this Romulan commander, and then apparently the producers liked him because he came back as Spock's father in a recurring role after that.
There's a lot of that, like I want to say, like incestual actors didn't Tim Russ was on one of the original movies and he went on to play Tuvok. Yeah. There's a lot of like B players that ended up coming back. So yeah, that's not uncommon.
Yep.
We cut to the ready room and we see Pike and Spock, and they are debating a little bit about the future, because Spock knows what's going on and Pike knows, but no one else on the Enterprise does. And they're trying to figure out, now that they're kind of up in the weeds with the Romulans, how do they avoid the future's dark path? Because that was the whole point that Pike came to the future to deal with. They don't have a solution. At one point, Pike asks Spock where Una is, and Spock mentions that she's been in a penal colony for 7 years. And when asked why, he says for deception.
For her deception.
Pike has jumped 7 years into the future, so what we know now is that Una has been in a penal colony for essentially this entire time. And if you'll remember, she was hiding her Allurian ancestry from the Federation, so the implication is that that they found her out and that she is basically in jail because of that.
Yeah, and not too far from our current timeline that young Pike has come from.
Right. And as they're debating this, James T. Kirk comes into the ready room and he says he has an idea and he asks to borrow a shuttle. We see a super quick scene, which I thought was kind of, we see Spock and he's repairing some phasers and he's in a Jeffries tube. He's hanging on this ladder and he's got a scanner out and a soldering iron or I don't know, whatever. And he's talking to someone, presumably in engineering, and the person has a very, very thick Scottish accent. So the implication here being that that's Scotty from the original series. We never see him. His name is never mentioned.
No, that's absolutely what they're going for, is that we've just seen Mr. Scott, but yeah, they don't ever mention him by name or anything, but it's him.
It was just a really quick throwaway scene. It doesn't add anything necessarily to the show, but they do, give Scotty a little shout out.
It was a cool nod.
Yep. We cut back to the bridge, and I believe Itsuhura mentions that it's been 2 hours, and so the two captains need to come back together and figure out what they're going to do. In the meantime, they've clearly been repairing the ships. So they get back together on the view screens, and they have a little chat, and Pike offers the Vulcans peace. He's like, basically, he says, we've been at war for 100 years. What has it gotten us? I get it. This is, in your DNA that you guys are aggressive, but nobody is winning this. Like, why are we doing this? We've been doing this for so long, and we haven't got anywhere. And actually, to his credit, the Vulcan captain says, "I too tire."
Romulan.
Yes, sorry. Yes, the Romulan captain says, "I too tire of endless war." So you get the impression, perhaps, that maybe this captain realizes, and he's sort of on Pike's side, and perhaps they were going to attempt peace, or at least go their separate ways without killing each other. But right about then, basically 100 Vulcan ships. I keep saying Vulcan. Romulan ships jump in and basically, surround everyone. So clearly, they have different ideas, or that's the impression, is that maybe this was a trap. And then it cuts to the Romulan ship, and he was like, "Whoa, how did the Romulan fleet get?" The captain is confused because he's like, "I didn't tell the Romulan fleet what was going on. How did they get here?" And essentially the second in command says, "I alerted them because you weren't doing what you needed to as a captain, so I let them know what was going on, and now they are here basically to help us out because you weren't willing to make that hard call." And the older captain, he mentions, he's like, "I remember a time without war. Endless war is pointless." So what he's saying is like, I'm an old guy. I remember what it was like before there was war. You're a young guy. Your entire life has been war. You don't know any different. So this is just what you're used to. He's, implying again that the older grizzled captains, perhaps are a little wiser, and they don't necessarily aren't as bloodthirsty as the young guys.
Yeah, they're not in it for ego or glory. He's just like, look, we can't win this. There's no point to this.
Cut back to the bridge, and the Enterprise is hailed by the Romulan flagship, and it's a woman, and they refer to her as the Praetor, and she basically demands the surrender of the Enterprise. And it's looking pretty grim at this point because it's just the Enterprise and 100 Romulan ships. Like, it's not even going to be close. And the Enterprise is already damaged. So right about then, you see basically 100 Federation ships jump in. So they're kind of facing off. You got the Federation on the left and the Romulans on the right. And,
sorry, right before this, I wanted to highlight some lines Pike says here.
Sure.
Which I think are great. When the Praetor lady, she says, "I accept your unconditional surrender." And then Pike says, "Nice to meet you too." I mean, I think this is a classic Pike line. You still get like the intensity of the moment, but he has that layer of the charm that can't be like, disturbed. It's great.
Yeah. He's unflappable. Like, he realizes he's going to get, yeah, right.
At one point she says something about, again, something about surrender or something like that. And he says, well, that's not going to happen, but we can talk.
So we see these 100 Federation ships jump in, and it's not clear exactly what they are. I mean, they don't all look like the Enterprise or ships that we recognize, but it's now 100 against 100. So it's at least not 100 to 1.
But we know these aren't Starfleet vessels. Starfleet vessels all pretty much look the same.
It happened so quick, I didn't really put two and two together.
They're really boxy, and they look nothing like a Federation starship. So.
I mean, they very quickly explain it, and basically it's Kirk, and he's taken the shuttle out to what's left of these outposts, and the implication is that he's taken remote control of all these mining ships, and he's brought them back, to basically bluff.
He's got a fleet of he's got the Merchant Marine going.
Yes. So he does have a good point. He says, hey, we haven't seen the Romulans in 100 years. They don't know what our ships look like anymore. So maybe we can bluff them with this long enough that maybe we can get away. Right about then, the Romulans actually end up turning on the main ship that had the grizzled captain on it. And
yeah, Pike, gets back in touch with the Praetor, and he says, "Hey, okay, well, now that the odds are even, let's talk here. We don't need to fight, but we've got you cold. We've got proof that you violated the neutral zone and blown up this outpost. And you guys are talking about our surrender, but you guys have already committed an act of war, and we can prove it." And so then he sends her a copy of the video, and she says, "Oh, okay, well, okay, then it's time for a culling." And it's like, okay, does that mean she's going to attack them? But then, yeah, we see pretty quickly what she means is that she's sending this ship they were dealing with out in front to be destroyed.
Yeah, I think at one point Pike asks, like, "What are you doing? What is this?" And she says, "It's a culling."
Yeah, she says that they were foolish enough to be detected, and so we're going to make an example of them.
Yeah, so basically the entire Romulan fleet fires on this ship and just destroys it.
So good job, second in command. That worked out great for you.
It really did. So, while this is happening, there's a minor distraction while they're shooting this Romulan ship. So the Enterprise, they try and go to warp. They're trying to get out of there because they're going to have a bad day with all they have is mining ships. They can't go to warp. Apparently, it's still being repaired. So Kirk pulls a maneuver with the mining ships, and he pulls all the mining ships and puts them between the Enterprise and the Romulans, just basically to serve as kind of a shield or a physical barrier.
Got a layer of cannon fodder.
And then they quickly beam Kirk on board from the shuttle. And then I think Uhura picks up a broadcast, and she says that the Romulans are broadcasting on all frequencies, and she emphasizes all frequencies. And she mentions that it's a declaration of war, and it's a really powerful scene and powerful line that the Romulans, they're going to the mat on this one. They are not happy.
Well, and the Praetor specifically says, "Hey, we really weren't sure what the situation was with the Federation, but now that we've seen that we can just fly in and attack you guys, and you're not going to do anything about it, then it's it's fair game. The smorgasbord has been laid out for us, and we're going to partake."
Right about then, the Romulan fleet fires on the Enterprise, and it takes some heavy damage. There's mention of hull breaches on, I think, 3 or 4 different decks. So it's looking very dire. At one point, the next thing we see is, Pike is kind of shell-shocked, and he wanders into sickbay, and you see him walking around, and it's in slow motion.
Yeah, well, they've gotten away. They are able to to warp out. And then, yeah, we hear that there's been a hit on the weapons bay, and he says, "Oh, that's where Spock is," and so he runs down to sick bay.
We see Pike in slow motion walking around, not freaked out, shell-shocked, and there's injuries everywhere. I mean, it's just bad news in sick bay. And, he turns a corner and he sees Spock, and he's badly burned on, the sick bay bed, and Chapel is
missing
there.
A leg.
Oh, he was? I didn't.
Yeah, one of his legs has been severed. His face is severely burned. He's in bad shape.
I wrote down that he was dead. And
yeah, I thought he was dead. I mean, he looks like hell.
I think it's supposed to be a similar fate to what
it
Pike
is,
had been visioning for himself. Yeah.
Well, right about then, Chapel walks up and she basically explains all of Spock's injuries, and there's a litany of them. And but she's visibly upset, and she's crying, and she basically says, "I'm not sure that he will recover from this, but if he does, he will not be the same."
Yeah.
And then we cut from there back to the ready room, and we see future Pike and current Pike again. So it's sort of, I guess, the end of his time traveling. It just has come full circle. There's no like quick flash and he's back there. He's just in his ready room again.
Right.
And future Pike looks at current Pike and he says, "I know what you're thinking." And current Pike responds, "That I traded my fate for Spock's." Pike is feeling guilty that, hey, yeah, I did figure out a way to save those cadets, and I did figure out how to save myself. but it ended up killing, one of my best friends, Spock, right? Which you could argue maybe that's not a terrible thing. You got 11 lives for one, I don't know. So
Sure.
but before he gets a chance to, fully debate that for himself, whether or not that's worth it, Future Pike mentions that Spock is the best chance for lasting peace in any timeline because the Romulans are back and that's going to be a problem. And he says, he's the best chance for lasting peace. And he's, lying on a bio bed down in sickbay. So,
yeah, and he says that the war with the Romulans has killed millions of people, and it's still ongoing.
He makes mention. Future Pike says that every time they change the path, they're going into the future. They're trying to do different things to get some peace, and every time they change the path, Spock ends up dying. So that seems to be the uniting thing of all these threads through time. And Future Pike says it gets kind of really serious and almost like philosophical here. He says he's got things to do, fate of the galaxy type things. So they're really kind of like setting Spock up here to be almost like some sort of like deity kind of thing.
Yeah, and Pike's, his message here is, you're doing important things. It's not that you don't matter, but Spock is just more important than either of us. So we got to take a bullet for Spock is his message.
Yeah, and I think it's right about there that Pike realizes that he has to sacrifice himself. There's no avoiding this fate. He's going to have to do this. Otherwise, it's going to be bad news for everyone, not just him, right?
Right. And we know that's true because we've seen what happens if Pike is captain of the Enterprise instead of Kirk. He's going to go into this, first contact with the Romulans all wishy-washy and show weakness, and they're going to attack and start a war. And so clearly, the only way for Pike to not be captain of the Enterprise is for him to be in a horrible accident and get disfigured and ruin his entire life. That's the only way. Because you can't resign from Starfleet. If you do, they just phaser you and tie you up and put you back in the captain's chair.
How about just ask for a commission on a different ship?
Yeah, you can't change ships. Can't do it. They don't allow that.
I think you're being sarcastic.
Well, I think you're being sarcastic, but I think you could make a play that he got.
It's just insane. Like the only way that fine. He's like, okay, in 6 years I'll resign my commission and Kirk can have the Enterprise. I don't need to.
Well, I think isn't that what Future Pike is saying, though? He says every time we change the path, Spock ends up dying.
He does, but that just doesn't make any sense.
I think it does. I think he's saying, we've tried a bunch of different things, and what everything we do, it doesn't work, which is why I came here to tell you that you've got to sacrifice yourself for Spock.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to imagine why in the timeline where Pike just quits Starfleet, that it doesn't proceed as if, I don't get it.
Well, maybe somebody comes for Spock and Pike has to jump in front of the bullet, to save the hinge pin of the universe. I don't know. Anyway, so the next thing we see real quick, we are coming to the end of the episode. We see James T. Kirk comes to the door and he kind of walks in while Future Pike and current Pike are talking to each other, and it catches Pike off guard, and he says, I was just talking to myself, and it was just a funny moment. And then we see Pike goes to the iPad, whatever the little computer thing they have is, and he has the letter to Mott, the cadet that dies on his computer, and he deletes the letter. So now that he's seen the future and he realizes that he could save these cadets, he chooses not to.
Well, first, him and Kirk have a conversation. They sit on the couch, they pour a drink, they're talking, and it's all real friendly. And then Kirk just says, "Hey, did it ever occur to you that instead of being such a milquetoast, you could have had some balls, and this whole thing could have been avoided?" Like, he just kicks him when he's down. It's really brutal.
Well, so Kirk is from the future then here?
No, this is a weird scene, and it's really strange because So as far as I could tell, what happens here is that Pike is still in the future, and then even farther future Pike visits him here, and they're talking about what's going on, and then Kirk comes in and they have their little conversation, at the end of which he touches the time crystal again and goes back to his original time. So
wow, I did not.
Yeah, it's a little bit. Yeah, it's odd. Like at first, I thought, oh, okay, he's gone back. After the scene with Spock in sickbay, and then now he's back in his quarters. I thought, okay, he's returned to his original time now. But then Kirk shows up.
Yeah.
So it's weird. It's a little hard to follow what's happening here. But the important part is that he does decide, like Scott said, he decides to delete the letter and sacrifice himself.
Mm-hmm.
What we see next is we cut to the briefing room, and Pike and Spock are there, and so we're back in the present time, and so this is right after Pike has walked out of the meeting, and Spock comes in and he says, "Whoa, that was kind of uncharacteristic. Are you feeling okay? You just took off." I noticed that it was that right after the boy said his name, is this related to your future? And, Pike basically says, yeah, essentially, his line is, some fates are inescapable, and even if I could get out of mine, it might just fall to someone else.
Yeah, and when Spock first comes in, he says he's very glad to see him.
Yeah.
And he's also looking at Captain Kirk's profile on.
Yeah,
on
he's Facebook stalking Kirk.
Yeah.
Oh, he was? I didn't notice.
Yeah.
And so the last scene that we see is we see the bridge, and we see Pike walk onto the bridge, and he is just.
Well, hang on. Before that end of that scene with Spock, there's a pretty touching moment where, he says, I can't avoid my fate, and even if I could, it would just fall to someone else. And Spock says, well, I'm assuming, based on the fact that you just said how glad you were to see me, that I'm the someone else.
Mm-hmm.
And Pike says, well, yeah. And Spock says, I don't really understand why, but I get the feeling I owe you a debt of gratitude. And they express that they care deeply for each other. It's there's a very bro moment going here.
They're hetero life mates.
Yeah.
The last scene again is on the bridge. Pike walks onto the bridge, and he's basically grinning ear to ear, kind of creepily. The other members of the bridge crew kind of look at him like, why are you so happy? You just walked onto the bridge. It's kind of weird. There's a musical overtone here, and the song is "I'm Making Memories I'd Like to Keep." So, there's clearly a reference to, future and past and memories. So it was
right, and he's going to make the best of it and enjoy life while he can. I get what they were going for, but this is a really odd choice for a song to play over the end of a Star Trek episode.
Oh, you think so? I thought it was great. It's not particularly Star Trek-y, but it was a great, just the lyrics I thought were great.
The lyrics fit the moment really well, but just the whole style of it was a little jarring to me.
It hit me right. I liked it.
I didn't think it was, I didn't think it was, oh man, I can't believe they did that. That was horrible. It wasn't that. It just struck me as a little bit odd.
Okay. Well, the very last thing that happens, Pike's walking around the bridge happy. And I think Uhura comes on and says that on for the comms that Captain Battelle is requesting that Pike and Una meet him, or she wants to meet him, and so he wants Pike and Una to meet her at the transporter room. And so they go to the transporter room real quick, and essentially Battelle, she apologizes to Pike, and she says, "I'm sorry I have to do this," but they take Una into custody, and they're basically arresting her for hiding her Allurian heritage. And so we're back to where this episode kind of started, where Una has been in a concentration camp, not a concentration. She's been in prison for 7 years. So this is essentially where that starts. I did think it was interesting that she brings 2 guards with her, and they walk over and they take Una by the arm, and Una accepts that she doesn't fight back, but Pike does. Pike does not want anything to do with this. And at one point, he grabs the guard. He grabs him by the arm.
Well, he doesn't even grab him. He like grabs his hand and like puts him in a stress position.
Yeah, like full on.
Yeah, Pike has now committed assault on a Starfleet officer.
And yeah, well, the guard doesn't even like flinch. He doesn't say anything. He just kind of goes limp, sort of, which I thought was weird. Like,
so why Pike's not in the brig at the end of this episode, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and then that's it. I mean, ultimately, Pike says, he realizes that it's futile, and he lets the guard go, and they walk away, and they all beam off, and they take Una, and then Starwipe, and that's credits. So
there's an interesting shot at the very end of the episode ends with a close up shot of Pike, looking determined. And then he looks directly into the camera for a few seconds, and then it cuts to the credits.
You're absolutely right. That was one of the screenshots I sent to your wife because Pike was smoldering there.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's it. That's the end of this episode, the end of the first season. You know what? I'll go first. I really liked this episode. There was a lot here. There was the characters were cool. We got to see some cool ship fights. We got to see the Romulans. And it wasn't just a simple, good versus evil or Romulans are bad. It was, there was some, there was some emotion and there was some debate, and there was, I thought all of the scenes between the Romulans and the Federation were good. It didn't go like I was expecting it to, where the Romulans are just bloodthirsty and they're not willing to negotiate and,
they're three-dimensional.
Yeah. So overall, I really liked this episode. I think it sets up some major things for season 2. So, I mean, Una's going to be gone, and Pike now has to accept his fate. And I think this was a fantastic ending to the season. I think I said it before on the last episode that of all the episodes in the first season, this one is rated the highest, I think by far. So this was a rather well-liked episode, and I don't disagree. I give this episode a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, this is the only one rated a 9. Everything else is 8, 7, or 6.
Jason, what about you? We'll let Ben go last because I know he's got strong feelings.
That's fair. I do want to get on record on my rating for the last 2 episodes since I was sorely missed, I'm sure.
Okay.
Episode 8, I wanted to give pretty high marks, 8.7. I was sick at the time. I had like a fever, and it really felt like a fever dream.
Yeah.
Is that the Illyrian Kingdom one?
The Elysian
Kingdom, yeah, there you
go. But the ending with Mbenga's daughter was heart-wrenching to me. I mean, it was out there, but it hit me hard, and I was just kind of like a puddle of mush at the end of that. It was crazy.
Well, so yeah, for the 2 people listening to this that don't know us, Jason, you've got 2 daughters, so yeah, I'm sure that hit pretty hard.
So I 8.7 for that. The obvious alien homage episode, I give a 6.3.
Wow.
It may be similar to other episodes in the series, but points removed for like being unoriginal, points removed for killing Hemmer. Pretty low rating for me. It didn't do much.
Yeah, we trashed it pretty hard for both of those reasons as well.
But that episode was rated very highly. I rated it high. I liked that episode, but Ben was not a big fan. So
it's probably my least favorite episode of the season.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Jason, what do you think about this one? What's your rating?
Okay, so I loved Pike getting like a central role in this episode. He really got to show the extent of his character. The themes of duty versus emotion, hawkishness versus dovishness were really clear as day. The tension between like calculation and emotions is really such a deep theme in Star Trek, and I thought it was presented here really well. It feels like a kind of a very military struggle, kind of wanting to perform your very best at every millisecond, but ultimately inevitably breaking. And what does that break look like? Seeing the birth of the Romulan interactions and that conflict was really interesting to see the internal conversations on their side of things. I enjoyed. The time travel element was a bit flimsy. I don't recall a lot of like time travel elements in Star Trek, whether they are the the singular timeline or the multiverse timeline type of things. You have to kind of agree on that. It seems like they're going with the singular timeline in this version, which it's always kind of flimsy and convenient with the Klingon time travel stone thing. I didn't love the actor playing Captain Kirk. I don't think I got any Captain Kirk vibe from him or charisma at all.
He also didn't. He doesn't particularly look like Captain Kirk.
He doesn't, and I have to say, I like that they didn't try to get someone who's doing Kirk.
Okay, yeah, sure.
But there's someone who's trying to impersonate William Shatner, which I don't want, and then there's someone who I never would have thought that was Kirk in a million years if they hadn't said his name. So I want something in the middle. I want someone who evokes that character, but isn't trying to, put a new spin on it, do something different. Don't try to just do a perfect copy, but it needs to at least evoke it a little bit. Yeah, I didn't get Kirk from that character at all.
Yeah, sort of like the suave, kind of more charismatic. This guy seemed like a military nerd that was just kind of just a hawkish dude. Didn't have much charisma. You got to have a little, suave or swagger, as a Kirk.
Well, but I will say that, to be fair, I will say that is more what Kirk is like in the first couple episodes of the original series, which is when this is taking place. So maybe that's what they're going for. But I mean, your audience has an idea of Kirk that's very different from that, and I feel like you have to lean into that a little bit.
Yeah, and I hear we're gonna get a lot more of Kirk in the next season. So,
oh really? Okay, so that wasn't. I was just gonna say, I really hope we don't.
I don't really care to see any more Kirk. I want to see more new characters and stories, not the same old rehash.
Right. I mean, I think the actor. I didn't think he did great, but I didn't have a big problem with it. I don't mind Kirk being in this episode. I think it was interesting for him to show up here, particularly since it ties into this whole idea that Pike being the captain instead of Kirk was what set this whole thing off. So it makes sense to have him be there. But yeah, I really hope this doesn't turn into the Kirk show. We've got plenty of Kirk we can go watch. I want to see Pike.
Yeah, I don't have a super strong attachment to Kirk. I just didn't love the actor. So overall,
I didn't mean to derail your rating there.
I am done. 8.3. Pretty high. Yeah. Really enjoyed the Pike elements. Mixed otherwise, but yeah.
All right, Ben.
I really liked this episode. It's probably my second favorite of the season. In fact, I think that's safe to say it's my second favorite. So I'll just give my rating up front and then I'll talk about why. I'm going to give this one an 8, and I thought about giving it a 9. I went with an 8 because the episode with the planet that's sacrificing a child, lift us where suffering cannot reach. That was my favorite of the season. I'll stick with a 9 for that one and put this one right below that. I really liked it. It's great. It's solid. The time travel stuff is anytime they do this, it's a mess. There's plot holes big enough to fly the Enterprise through, but I can forgive that. It's fine. If it's in service of good story, that's all I really care about. And this one was really interesting. I love this tie-in to the original series episode, which again happens to be one of my favorites. So I'm a sucker for that. But it was really clever the way they did it. They're placing Pike into this story that originally we saw Kirk go through. So seeing how two different people would address the same scenario and get wildly different results was pretty cool. We get some great moments with Pike and Spock. We really see the relationship these two have. In the original series, we get some sense of that in that in the episode The Menagerie, where Pike is featured, Spock basically mutinies. He takes over the Enterprise and sends it to this planet to rescue Captain Pike. And he's defying the orders of his captain. He submits himself for a court martial at the end of it. So he's willing to really go bend over backwards for Pike. And we just are told that they were, he served under Pike for a long time and they're close, but now we're really getting to see that relationship develop, which is really cool. I do wish we had a little bit more for some of the other characters to do, considering this is the last episode of the season. So we got basically nothing but Pike and Spock in this one. Mbenga was barely, he's there in that one little scene. He barely gets to do anything. Luan's there for like one season. I wish that we got a little bit more of the ensemble in this one, since it's the last episode of the season. If this one had come, second to last or something, here's what we should have done. Get rid of the aliens episode and then have this be episode 9 and then do an episode 10 that's more of an ensemble piece. That would have been fun. But no, I really like this one. It was like I said, the second best of the season as far as I'm concerned.
I really like. I think you said that really well, where you're willing to look past certain elements. Like I think you said, you look past the bad time travel stuff if it's in service of a good story. And
right.
I think that's kind of Star Trek at its core, right? I mean,
I'll
you're
forgive almost anything as long as you're going to use it as a tool to tell a good story. I'm in.
Yeah, because at its at its core, Star Trek is about phasers and space. None of that stuff is real, but it serves a point to tell a good story and entertain and perhaps educate. So I think I like that. I give you props for that.
Yeah.
All right. So
we ended strong, and I'm really excited for season 2.
So before I wrap this up, I had one final question. So we've determined that Pike realizes that he can't save himself, that he has to sacrifice himself to save Spock, to, in essence, save the galaxy. So my question to you is, if they found a story-wise way that Pike was able to save himself and it did not affect and he did not have to be, maimed and whatnot.
Sure.
But he does not continue to be the captain of the Enterprise. If they were able to find a way to alter that timeline, would that take away from this show? Because we know where it's going to go. Would you feel cheated if they were able to rework that and it doesn't end where we expect it to end?
Frankly, I'll be surprised if it ends where we expect it to end. If they really end this with Pike in the freaky beepy wheelchair, I'll be pretty surprised.
Okay. I was thinking about that. Like, if this goes, I don't know, 5 seasons, 6 seasons, whatever, and they find some time travel-y way, or they find some other way for, him to be happy and sustained, and he, goes off with the Traveler like in TNG, and he doesn't have to die. I don't care. I'm not super invested in Pike ending up that he has to end up in that wheelchair.
No, it won't take away from an episode like this. Yeah, totally.
If they can make a good story and he ends up doing something else, I don't care if he ends up in that wheelchair or not. But I feel like they're feeling like perhaps they're going to be hemmed in, that it has to end that. I don't know. We'll see.
Do we know what the time period is of his visions in that? Like how long in the future that is going to take place?
He makes mention at the beginning of the episode. Let me see that he says it's 7 years in the future.
Oh, lucky number 7. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, you could be entirely right that that's what they were going for. They have no way to know that they're going to get 7 seasons, but that's the pedigree for a Star Trek show.
It's a fine, it's a perfectly fine like target for something inevitably having to happen or having to be resolved and having like a series long arc of sorts. Right. Yeah.
We'll see. It's 2022 and TV's more edgy now and everything. So, I guess we'll see, but this is supposed to be the, return to form of the optimistic look at the future of Star Trek. So, we've we've seen something a little bit like that with DS9, where it ends with Cisco going off with the prophets, and he's not dead, but he's gone, and everybody's pretty sad about that. So DS9 ended on the good guys win, but there's a lot of downer endings with DS9. A lot of people whose lives are changed pretty dramatically, or people being separated and things like that. So they've flirted with that a bit in the dark Star Trek show that DS9 was.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll be pretty surprised if Strange New Worlds ends with Pike in a wheelchair. I think it's a bit too rough of an ending for this show and this character that they've established. I'll be really surprised if they do that. They'll find some hand wavy way out of it, and I'm fine with that.
I don't even care if they just straight up retcon it. Like, this is an alternate timeline, and in this timeline, he survives. Like, okay, I don't care. Because again, I want to see good stories, and I don't want them to feel like they're forced that this is what they have to do with this character. Like,
yeah, keep their options open. Do whatever works for the story at the time. I'm totally fine with that.
They can go like multiple seasons without even mentioning this, I'm sure.
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So it's not, I don't think it's a big like hole that they're writing themselves into, personally. But yeah.
All right. Well, that is everything that I had to say about the finale. So this is the season 1 finale. Do we know when the season 2 is coming on the air? Anybody look that up?
I thought it was already out.
No, it's not out yet.
Oh.
I don't know that they've even announced when that's happening. Yeah, it's coming sometime this year, but I don't think they've given an exact date. So,
yeah, it looks like according to Wikipedia, it says 2023. So sometime this year, but we don't have a hard and fast date yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do know the episode 1 is directed by the same person that directed this last episode. So it's most likely going to be like a 2-parter.
Oh yeah, that would make sense. Okay.
They ended it on a cliffhanger, so.
All right. Well, we will be back in the future.